I never thought I'd discover my entire college fund had been emptied for my sister's dream wedding, until I found myself staring at a zero balance just 2 months before freshman year. My parents' decision shattered not just my future plans, but my belief that hard work guaranteed opportunity in our family. Little did they know that their betrayal would ultimately lead to my story making national headlines and changing the trajectory of my life forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The acceptance letter from Stanford University arrived on a perfect spring morning. Sunlight streamed through our living room windows as I tore open the envelope with trembling fingers, my heart pounding with a mixture of hope and terror. For 4 years, I had maintained a flawless 4.0 GPA, captained the debate team to nationals, volunteered over 1,000 hours at the local hospital, and slept an average of 5 hours a night to build the perfect application. I got in! Screamed, my voice breaking with emotion as I scanned the congratulatory first paragraph. Mom, Dad, I actually got in. My father looked up from his newspaper, his expression revealing more concern than pride. My mother's reaction was similarly muted, her congratulatory hug stiff and brief. At the time, I attributed their response to shock or perhaps worry about the prestigious university's cost. Stanford had been my dream school since childhood, when a visiting professor had spoken at our middle school career day and ignited my passion for biomedical engineering. "That's wonderful, Olivia," my mother said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "We'll need to discuss the financial aspects, of course." I nodded, still too elated to register the warning in her tone. "I know it's expensive, but I've been researching scholarships nonstop. Plus, we have my college fund that Grandpa started. Between those, student loans, and the work-study program, we can make it work." My parents exchanged a glance I couldn't interpret. My father cleared his throat. "Let's celebrate this weekend. Your mother and I need to look at some numbers first." Their subdued reaction dimmed my excitement slightly, but nothing could completely extinguish the thrill of admission to one of the most competitive bioengineering programs in the country. I texted my best friend Zoe and my favorite teacher, Mrs. Chamberlain, who had written one of my recommendation letters. Their enthusiastic responses helped balance my parents' lukewarm reaction. That evening, my older sister Melissa called from New York. Unlike me, Melissa had never been particularly academic. She'd attended the state university for 2 years before dropping out to pursue a career in fashion marketing. Recently engaged to Jackson, the son of a prominent real estate developer, she had been consumed with wedding planning for months. "Mom told me about Stanford," she said after minimal congratulations. "It's impressive, but honestly, Liv, is going into debt for an undergraduate degree really worth it? Jackson's cousin went to state and got the same job offers as his friends from those fancy schools." I bit back my frustration. This was typical. Melissa, minimizing my achievements while centering the conversation on her perspective. "Stanford has the specific bioengineering program I want. Their graduate placement rate is incredible." "If you say so," she replied dismissively. "Anyway, did Mom tell you? We found the perfect venue for the wedding. It's this historic mansion in the Hamptons. Absolutely gorgeous, but only available Memorial Day weekend, so we had to move the wedding up. I'm sending you the bridesmaid dress options tonight." The conversation shifted entirely to her wedding plans, and I let it happen, too accustomed to this dynamic to fight it. In our family, Melissa's needs had always taken priority. While my parents had never explicitly favored her, there was an unspoken hierarchy. Her dance recitals warranted family attendance. My debate competitions were often missed due to scheduling conflicts. Her fashion interests received encouraging investment. My scientific pursuits were treated as impractical hobbies. 2 days later, my parents called me into the dining room for what they described as an important family discussion. They sat side by side across from me, their expressions grave. My mother had prepared a pot of tea, something she only did for serious conversations. "Olivia," my father began, his voice unusually formal, "we're incredibly proud of your acceptance to Stanford. Your academic achievements are remarkable, and we've always supported your educational aspirations." I felt a growing unease at his careful preamble. "But," my mother reached for my hand across the table, "but we need to discuss the financial reality. Stanford is extremely expensive, even with scholarships and financial aid." "I know that," I replied. "That's why I've been counting on my college fund. Grandpa started it the day I was born, and you both have been adding to it for years. Last time we discussed it, you said there was enough to cover most of undergraduate tuition." Another loaded glance passed between them. My father adjusted his glasses, a nervous habit he displayed when uncomfortable. "That's what we need to discuss," he said finally. "The college fund. It's no longer available." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What do you mean, no longer available? Did the market crash? Did the bank make some mistake?" My mother's grip on my hand tightened. "No, nothing like that. We reallocated those funds." "Reallocated?" I repeated, the word feeling strange in my mouth. "To where?" My father straightened the placemat in front of him, avoiding my eyes. "Several months ago, we made the decision to use that money for Melissa's wedding." The room seemed to tilt around me. I pulled my hand away from my mother's. "You used my college fund for Melissa's wedding? All of it?" "Your sister is getting married, Olivia," my mother said, a defensive edge entering her voice. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime event. Jackson's family is very prominent, and the wedding needs to reflect that. We couldn't ask them to bear the entire financial burden." I struggled to process what I was hearing. But that money was specifically for my education. Grandpa created that account for my college. "Your grandfather would understand the importance of family appearances," my father countered. "The Thatchers are influential people. This connection could benefit all of us." "So my future was sacrificed for Melissa to have centerpieces and a designer dress?" I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to remain calm. "How is that fair?" My mother's expression hardened. "Life isn't always fair, Olivia. Sometimes family needs must take priority over individual wants. Your sister's wedding is happening now. College can be delayed." "Delayed?" I echoed in disbelief. "I've just been accepted to one of the best bioengineering programs in the country. I can't just delay that." "There are other options," my father said, pulling a brochure from a folder I hadn't noticed. "Community college for 2 years, then transfer. Or the state university. We could manage that with loans and if you lived at home." I stared at them. These people I'd trusted implicitly my entire life. "You've been planning this conversation," I realized aloud. "You knew about the Stanford acceptance and already had alternatives prepared." "We're trying to be practical," my mother insisted. "The money is already spent, Olivia. Deposits have been made, contracts signed. Melissa's wedding is in 3 weeks. And when were you planning to tell me that my future had been sold to pay for my sister's party?" I asked, my voice shaking now. "After I'd turned down other acceptances? After all the scholarship deadlines had passed?" My father sighed heavily. "We should have discussed this with you earlier. That was a mistake. But what's done is done. We need to focus on solutions now." I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "I need some air." "Olivia," my mother called as I headed for the door. "Don't be dramatic. This isn't the end of the world." I turned back, meeting her gaze directly. "It's the end of the world you promised me. The one where hard work and dedication matter, where my future was worth investing in. That world just disappeared." Outside, the spring air felt too warm, too normal for the seismic shift that had just occurred in my life. I walked blindly down our tree-lined suburban street, my mind racing through options and finding none. Without the college fund, Stanford was financially impossible. Most scholarship deadlines had indeed passed. My carefully constructed plans were collapsing around me, sacrificed for flower arrangements and champagne toasts. The betrayal cut deeper than the financial loss. For years, I'd believed in a fundamental fairness in our family. I knew Melissa received more attention, more praise for minimal effort, but I'd convinced myself that my academic dedication was equally valued, just expressed differently. Now I understood the truth. When push came to shove, my sister's social aspirations outweighed my academic future. I found myself at Riverside Park, where I'd spent countless hours studying under the oak trees. Sitting on a bench overlooking the water, I finally allowed the tears to come. Not just for Stanford, but for the shattered illusion of family support, for the years of exhaustive work that had apparently meant so little to the people who should have been my biggest advocates. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, I made a decision. This would not be the end of my story. Somehow, I would find a way to create my own path forward, one that didn't depend on parents who had proven their priorities lay elsewhere. I didn't know yet how I would manage it, but I knew with absolute certainty that I would not accept defeat. I pulled out my phone and began researching emergency scholarship options, my determination hardening with each passing minute. My parents had made their choice. Now I would make mine. The next morning, I woke to a series of text notifications from Melissa. My sister, never one for patience, had apparently been informed of our parents' disclosure about the college fund. Rather than expressing remorse or even acknowledging the gravity of the situation, her messages carried the familiar tone of entitled indignation. "Mom says you're making a huge drama over the wedding budget. Can you please not ruin this for me? This is literally the most important day of my life." I stared at the phone, a strange sense of clarity washing over me. Of course, Melissa wouldn't see anything wrong with our parents' decision. Throughout our lives, she had been conditioned to expect that her desires would take precedence. Why would this situation be any different? Instead of responding immediately, I dressed and headed downstairs. My parents sat at the kitchen table, my father behind his laptop, and my mother reviewing what appeared to be wedding seating arrangements. They glanced up when I entered, their expressions a mixture of wariness and resignation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Good morning," I said, my voice deliberately neutral as I poured myself coffee. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday." "We're glad to hear that," my mother replied, setting aside her papers. "We knew you'd see reason after you had time to process everything." I took a careful sip of coffee, organizing my thoughts. "I'm not accepting your decision, but I am acknowledging the reality of it. The money is gone. Now I need to focus on alternatives." My father removed his reading glasses. "That's a mature approach, Olivia. We've been looking into some options ourselves. The community college route really would be the most sensible." "I'm not going to community college," I interrupted, surprising myself with my firmness. "I've earned my place at Stanford, and I'm going to find a way to make it happen without your financial support." My mother's expression tightened. "That's simply not realistic. You're 17, with no credit history and limited work experience. The deadline for Stanford's initial tuition deposit is coming up soon." "I'm aware of the timeline," I replied. "I've already emailed the financial aid office explaining my situation and requesting an emergency consultation. I've also applied for 3 last-minute scholarships and reached out to Grandpa directly." At the mention of my grandfather, both my parents stiffened. Robert Caldwell, my mother's father, had always been my most vocal supporter. A retired engineering professor, he had recognized and encouraged my scientific aptitude from an early age. Though his relationship with my mother had been strained for years due to her marriage to my father, whom he considered lacking in ambition, he had maintained a close bond with me through regular letters and occasional visits. "You contacted your grandfather?" My mother's voice rose slightly. "Olivia, that was completely inappropriate. Family financial matters should stay within the immediate family." "The college fund he established for me is certainly his business," I countered. "He deserves to know what happened to the money he set aside for my education." "That fund was legally in our names as your parents," my father interjected. "We made a difficult decision based on current family priorities." "I understand that what you did was legally permissible," I said, maintaining a calm I didn't entirely feel. "I'm not disputing that, but I am going to exhaust every possibility to attend Stanford, including asking Grandpa for advice and potentially assistance." My phone buzzed with another text from Melissa. "Seriously, why aren't you responding?" "Mom says you're being completely selfish about this wedding thing." I felt a flare of genuine anger. "Did you tell Melissa I'm being selfish for being upset about losing my college fund to her wedding?" My mother had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "I simply explained that you were disappointed about Stanford's cost, and that we're exploring other options that make more financial sense for the family right now." "That's not what happened," I said, my voice steady despite my rising frustration. "You emptied an account specifically designated for my education to pay for an extravagant wedding. You made this decision without consulting me, and you waited until after I'd been accepted to tell me. Those are the facts." "The facts," my father countered, "are that your sister is marrying into an important family, and this wedding is a significant social investment. Sometimes individual sacrifices must be made for the greater family good." His choice of words, social, investment, rather than celebration of love and individual sacrifices that somehow only applied to me, spoke volumes about their priorities. "I need to get ready for school," I said, recognizing the futility of further discussion. "My AP exams start next week, and I can't afford to lose my focus." As I turned to leave, my mother called after me. "Olivia, please be reasonable, and don't forget, you have a final dress fitting for the bridesmaid gown this Saturday." I paused, in the doorway. "I'll be there. I'm not going to punish Melissa for a decision you and Dad made." Though privately, I wondered if my sister was entirely innocent in this situation. Had she known about the source of her lavish wedding budget? Had she cared? At school, I struggled to concentrate on my AP Physics review session. Between equations, I checked my email repeatedly for responses from the financial aid office or the scholarship committees. During lunch, I sequestered myself in the library to complete 2 more emergency scholarship applications I'd found. My best friend Zoe joined me, sliding into the chair across from mine. "You look terrible," she observed bluntly. "What's going on? I thought you'd still be floating after the Stanford acceptance." I hesitated, embarrassment momentarily overriding my need for support. Admitting that my parents had prioritized my sister's wedding over my education felt humiliating. But Zoe had been my friend since 3rd grade. If anyone would understand, she would. In a hushed library voice, I explained the situation. Zoe's expression morphed from confusion to disbelief, to outrage. "They did what?" she hissed, earning us a sharp look from the librarian. Lowering her voice, she continued, "That's beyond unfair. That's theft, Liv. They stole your future to pay for your sister's party." Hearing someone else validate, my feelings brought a rush of relief. They don't see it that way. They think I'm being selfish for not understanding the family priorities. "That's gaslighting," Zoe declared firmly. "My mom's a financial advisor. Want me to ask her about options? Maybe there are loans or programs we don't know about." I nodded gratefully. "That would be amazing. I'm trying everything I can think of, but I'm navigating blind here." "We'll figure this out," Zoe promised, her determination bolstering my own. Stanford won't know what hit them when Olivia Caldwell arrives on campus. Funding drama be damned. That afternoon, I received an email from Stanford's financial aid office scheduling a virtual meeting for the following day. It wasn't a solution, but it was a start. Someone was willing to listen to my situation. When I arrived home, I found Melissa waiting in the living room. She'd driven in from the city, ostensibly for wedding preparations, but her crossed arms and defensive posture suggested another purpose. "Finally," she said as I set down my backpack, "we need to talk about this ridiculous tantrum you're throwing." I met her gaze steadily. "I'm not throwing a tantrum, Melissa. I'm responding to a major setback that affects my entire future." "Don't be so dramatic," she scoffed. "It's just college. Plenty of people go to state schools or take gap years. The world doesn't end because you don't get to go to your dream school right away." "This isn't about not getting my first choice," I explained, keeping my voice level. "It's about the fact that money specifically saved for my education was used for your wedding without my knowledge or consent." Melissa rolled her eyes. "It's not like the money was in your name. Mom and Dad make the financial decisions in this family, and frankly, this wedding is a priority right now. The Thatchers are expecting a certain standard, and we can't embarrass ourselves with some budget ceremony." The casual cruelty of her dismissal stung, but it also confirmed what I'd suspected. Melissa had been fully aware of the source of her wedding funds. "Did you know the money was coming from my college fund when you planned this wedding?" I asked directly. A flicker of discomfort crossed her face before she recovered her indignant expression. "Mom and Dad said they had it covered. The specific accounts weren't my concern." "But you knew," I pressed. "At some point you knew, and you were fine with it." Melissa straightened her designer blouse, avoiding my eyes. "Look, everyone makes sacrifices in a family. When I was your age, I wanted to attend fashion design school in Paris, but it wasn't financially feasible. I adjusted my expectations, and so should you." "The difference," I pointed out, "is that you chose to drop out of college. I've worked towards this goal my entire academic career." "And I'm sure you'll work something out," she said dismissively. "You always do. But right now, I need you to focus on being a supportive bridesmaid. The rehearsal dinner is next Friday, and you haven't even confirmed your availability for the hair and makeup trial run." The conversation was so absurd I nearly laughed. My sister was genuinely more concerned about my hairstyle for her wedding than the fact that her celebration had come at the cost of my education. "I'll be at the rehearsal dinner," I assured her, seeing no point in creating additional conflict. "And I'll handle the bridesmaid duties as promised. But I want you to understand that this situation has fundamentally changed my relationship with both you and our parents." Melissa's expression softened slightly, the first hint of genuine emotion she'd shown. "Liv, I know you're disappointed, but this wedding is opening doors for all of us. Jackson's family has connections everywhere: finance, real estate, even medical research. This could ultimately benefit your career too." The implication that I should be grateful for potential networking opportunities through her marriage was so perfectly in character that I couldn't even muster anger in response. "I need to study," I said simply. "I have AP exams all next week." "Fine," she sighed, clearly interpreting my lack of argument as acceptance. "But please try to be more positive about everything. Negative energy is the last thing I need right now." As I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, I realized that this conversation had clarified something important. The issue wasn't just my parents' decision, or even Melissa's entitlement. It was an entire family dynamic that had systematically prioritized my sister's wants over my needs. And for the first time, I was refusing to accept my assigned role in that dynamic. With renewed determination, I opened my laptop and began preparing for tomorrow's meeting with Stanford's financial aid office. I would find a way forward, not because my family believed in me, but precisely because they had shown that they didn't. The morning of my financial aid meeting with Stanford, I woke before my alarm. After a restless night filled with anxious dreams about missed opportunities and endless wedding preparations, I felt surprisingly clear-headed. I dressed carefully in a navy blazer over a simple blouse, professional enough to convey seriousness without seeming pretentious for a high school student. My virtual appointment was scheduled during my study hall period, so I'd arranged with Mrs. Chamberlain to use her empty classroom for privacy. As I headed downstairs, I found my mother arranging elaborate flower samples on the dining table, consulting a color palette chart that matched Melissa's wedding theme. "I'm leaving early today," I informed her, grabbing an apple from the fruit bowl. "I have my meeting with Stanford's financial aid office." My mother glanced up briefly. "Olivia, I wish you wouldn't get your hopes up. Even with financial aid, Stanford will be well beyond our means now. It would be kinder to yourself to focus on realistic options." The casual way she referenced the financial situation, as if it were an unfortunate act of nature rather than a deliberate choice, reignited my frustration. But I had neither the time nor energy for another fruitless argument. "I'm exploring all options," I replied neutrally. "That's the responsible approach, isn't it?" Before she could respond, my phone chimed with an incoming call. The screen displayed a name that instantly shifted the morning's dynamic. Robert Caldwell. My grandfather rarely called, preferring handwritten letters for our regular correspondence. A call, especially this early, signaled something significant. "It's Grandpa," I said, already moving toward the front door for privacy. My mother's expression tightened with apprehension. "Olivia, wait!" But I was already answering, stepping onto the front porch and closing the door behind me. "Grandpa? Good morning." "Olivia." His deep voice, still carrying traces of his British upbringing despite 50 years in America, held a note of controlled anger I'd rarely heard. "I received your email last night. I'd like you to explain the situation in your own words, please." I took a deep breath and gave him a concise account of what had transpired. The Stanford acceptance, the revelation about my college fund, my parents' justification, and my current efforts to salvage my educational plans. I presented the facts without emotional embellishment, knowing my grandfather valued clarity and precision. When I finished, silence hung on the line for several seconds. "I see," he finally said, his tone measured in a way that suggested significant restraint. "And the wedding is taking place?" "In 2.5 weeks," I confirmed. "Memorial Day weekend." Another weighted pause. "I'm disappointed but not entirely surprised," he said eventually. "Your mother has always struggled with appropriate priorities, and your father has never demonstrated particular strength of character." While I privately agreed with his assessment, hearing it stated so bluntly made me uncomfortable. Despite everything, these were still my parents. "The immediate concern," Grandpa continued, "is your Stanford acceptance. You have a financial aid meeting today?" "Yes, at 11:30. I'm not very hopeful, though. The standard financial aid packages have already been distributed, and most emergency funds are for students already enrolled who experience unexpected changes." "I understand. Listen carefully, Olivia. Do not make any final decisions or statements in this meeting. Simply gather information about all possible avenues of assistance. After your meeting, call me immediately. I'm rearranging my schedule to be available. Can you do that?" "Yes, of course," I agreed, curiosity piqued by his directive. "Good. And Olivia? I am extraordinarily proud of your achievements. Stanford's bioengineering program is notoriously selective. Your acceptance is a testament to years of discipline and intellectual rigor. Never doubt that your academic future matters, regardless of what anyone else might suggest." His words brought an unexpected lump to my throat. "Thank you, Grandpa. We'll speak later today. For now, focus on your meeting." When I ended the call and turned to re-enter the house, I found my mother standing in the doorway, her expression a mixture of concern and defensiveness. "What did he say?" she demanded without preamble. "He's disappointed about the college fund," I replied simply. "We're talking again after my Stanford meeting." My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. "Your grandfather has never understood the social complexities of family obligations. He views everything through the narrow lens of academic achievement." "Maybe because academic achievement is what creates actual opportunities," I countered, unable to maintain perfect neutrality. "Unlike social connections that depend on expensive parties and other people's goodwill." "You're too young to understand how the world really works," she sighed. "Network and connections open doors that credentials alone cannot." Rather than continue a conversation that would only circle familiar territory, I checked my watch and shouldered my backpack. "I need to get to school." "Olivia," my mother called as I walked toward my bike, "remember that your grandfather has always had complicated feelings about this family. Don't let his bitterness influence your perspective." I paused, struck by the irony of her concern about influence when she and my father had consistently prioritized Melissa's desires over my needs. "I'll form my own conclusions, Mom. That's what critical thinking is for." At school, I navigated morning classes on autopilot, my thoughts consumed with the upcoming financial aid meeting. When study hall finally arrived, I made my way to Mrs. Chamberlain's classroom, where she had set up her laptop at her desk. "All ready for you," she said warmly. "I've put the do not disturb sign on the door, so you'll have complete privacy. Good luck, Olivia." "Thank you so much for arranging this," I said gratefully. "Of course. Stanford would be lucky to have you. I hope they recognize that and find a way to make it possible." Alone in the classroom, I logged into the video conference platform 5 minutes early, reviewing my notes while I waited. Precisely at 11:30, a woman in her mid-40s appeared on screen, with a warm smile and Stanford's iconic red and white color scheme visible in her office background. "Olivia Caldwell? I'm Dr. Elena Morales, Associate Director of Financial Aid for STEM programs. It's nice to meet you, though I wish it were under better circumstances." "Thank you for making time to meet with me," I replied, surprised by her personalized knowledge of my situation. "Your email was quite compelling," she explained, as if reading my thoughts. "We don't often receive such articulate explanations of financial hardship from prospective students, especially with documentation of prior funding plans." For the next 30 minutes, Dr. Morales outlined various financial options: standard loans, work-study programs, department-specific scholarships, and emergency aid situations. She was refreshingly honest about limitations, particularly for first-year students who hadn't yet established themselves in the university community. "I won't sugarcoat this, Olivia," she said toward the end of our discussion. "Without family contribution or your expected college fund, there's a substantial gap that standard financial aid won't cover. However," she continued, "your academic profile is exceptional. Your AP scores and research experience already place you in the top percentile of our incoming class." She leaned forward slightly, her expression thoughtful. "There are a few special circumstance scholarships that aren't widely publicized. Given your background in biomedical research, I'd like to connect you with Dr. Harrison in the engineering department. He administers a private foundation scholarship specifically for women entering bioengineering with demonstrated financial need and exceptional promise." "That would be incredibly helpful," I said, feeling a small spark of hope for the first time in days. I should mention that the selection process is intense, typically involving a research proposal and interview. The deadline is also quite soon, next Wednesday. But based on your application materials, I believe you should pursue this opportunity." After providing additional details and promising to email scholarship information, Dr. Morales offered some final encouragement. "Olivia, situations like yours are frustrating because they're outside your control. But please know that Stanford admits students because we believe in their potential, not their bank accounts. We want to find a way to make this work." When the meeting ended, I sat for a moment in the empty classroom, processing the information. The special scholarship offered a potential lifeline, albeit a challenging one to secure. I needed to call my grandfather with this update, but first I took a moment to write detailed notes while the information was fresh. As I was organizing my thoughts, the classroom door opened and Mrs. Chamberlain returned. "How did it go?" she asked hopefully. "Better than expected," I admitted. "There might be a special engineering scholarship I could apply for, though the deadline is extremely tight." She sat at a student desk across from me. "If you need time to work on the application, I can arrange for you to use my classroom during your study periods, and I'd be happy to review any materials before you submit them." "That would be amazing," I said gratefully. The application apparently requires a research proposal, which isn't something I've done formally before. "Actually," Mrs. Chamberlain said, her expression brightening, "this might work out perfectly. Do you remember Dr. Sorensen, who spoke to our AP biology class last semester about his work in regenerative medicine?" I nodded. The guest lecture had been fascinating. Dr. Sorensen was pioneering new approaches to tissue engineering that had captured my imagination. "He's an old friend from graduate school," she continued. "He mentioned they're looking for summer research assistants at his university lab. The positions are usually for undergraduates, but given your academic standing, I wonder if we could kill two birds with one stone. Would you be interested in me reaching out to him?" The possibility of expert guidance for my scholarship proposal combined with potential research experience sent a surge of excitement through me. That would be incredible. "Yes, please." "I'll email him today," she promised. "Now, don't you have a grandfather to call?" I smiled at her perceptiveness. "I do. And thank you, Mrs. Chamberlain, for everything." Finding a quiet corner in the school courtyard, I called my grandfather and detailed my conversation with Dr. Morales, including the potential scholarship opportunity. "Excellent," he said when I'd finished. "This scholarship sounds promising, particularly with your background. Now, regarding the broader situation, I've been making some inquiries this morning. Are you free to meet in person this afternoon? Say 4 o'clock at Westfield Coffee downtown?" The unexpected invitation surprised me. "Yes, I can be there." "But Grandpa, aren't you in Boston?" His retirement community was nearly 3 hours away. "I was," he replied with a hint of satisfaction. "I'm currently checking into the Grand Hotel downtown. I'll be in Riverdale for the next few weeks." The implications of this statement, that my 78-year-old grandfather had immediately traveled to town upon learning of my situation, left me momentarily speechless. 4 o'clock then, he confirmed into my silence. "And Olivia, don't mention our meeting to your parents just yet. I think it's best we have our conversation first." As I ended the call, I felt a curious mixture of anxiety and anticipation. My grandfather's decisive intervention suggested a turning point in what had seemed an impossible situation. For the first time since discovering my emptied college fund, I allowed myself to feel genuine hope. Whatever my grandfather had in mind, one thing was clear. I was no longer facing this betrayal alone. Westfield Coffee occupied a historic brick building in downtown Riverdale, its interior a thoughtful blend of original architectural features and modern design elements. At precisely 4 o'clock, I pushed through the heavy wooden door, scanning the busy cafe for my grandfather's familiar figure. I spotted him in a secluded corner booth, his posture as impeccable as always. Despite his 78 years, Robert Caldwell maintained the bearing of the engineering professor he had been for over 4 decades, observant, precise, and unyielding in his expectations of excellence. Unlike most retirees who gravitated toward casual comfort, he wore a crisp, button-down shirt and charcoal slacks, his silver hair neatly combed. As I approached, He rose slightly in a gesture of old-world courtesy that had always made me feel respected rather than patronized. "Olivia?" He greeted me warmly. "Right on time, as usual." "Hi, Grandpa," I replied, sliding into the seat across from him. A pot of tea and an assortment of pastries already waited on the table. "You didn't have to come all this way. We could have handled this over the phone." "Some conversations require presence," he said, pouring tea into a cup and sliding it toward me, "especially those involving family obligations and future planning." A server appeared to take my additional order, and once she departed, my grandfather leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. "I've spent the morning making several calls, including one to my attorney and another to the Dean of Engineering at Stanford, an old colleague from my MIT days. Before we discuss those conversations, I'd like to hear more about this scholarship opportunity Dr. Morales mentioned." I described the specialized engineering scholarship in greater detail, including the research proposal requirement and tight timeline. "Mrs. Chamberlain is connecting me with Dr. Sorensen, the tissue engineering researcher who visited our class last semester. She thinks he might help guide my proposal development." My grandfather nodded approvingly. "Catherine Chamberlain has always recognized genuine scientific aptitude. This connection could prove valuable beyond the immediate scholarship application." "The deadline's next Wednesday," I added, "which means I'll be working on it through Melissa's wedding weekend." At the mention of the wedding, my grandfather's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Yes, the wedding. We'll address that momentarily. First, regarding Stanford, I've confirmed with Dean Whitaker that your admission status is exceptional even by their standards. Your research on biodegradable polymers for medical applications particularly impressed the committee." This unexpected information momentarily distracted me from our primary discussion. They specifically mentioned my research? I didn't think high school projects would carry much weight with them. "Quality work stands out at any level," my grandfather stated matter-of-factly, "which brings me to the purpose of this meeting." He extracted a leather portfolio from his briefcase and placed it on the table between us. "Olivia, I established your college fund the day you were born with the explicit purpose of ensuring your educational opportunities would never be limited by financial constraints. When your scientific aptitude became evident in elementary school, I increased my contributions accordingly, anticipating you might pursue advanced degrees at premier institutions." He opened the portfolio, revealing several formal documents. "I was disturbed but not entirely surprised to learn that your parents had redirected these funds to Melissa's wedding. While I made the tactical error of trusting them as custodians of the account, I fortunately maintained certain contingency plans." "Contingency plans?" I echoed, uncertain what he meant. "Indeed. While your primary college fund was established as a custodial account under your parents' control, an arrangement I now deeply regret, I simultaneously created a second, smaller trust that becomes accessible to you upon either your 18th birthday or college enrollment, whichever comes first." I stared at him, processing this revelation. "There's another account? With money for college?" "Not merely for college," he clarified. "For your education broadly defined, including research opportunities, academic conferences, necessary equipment, and living expenses during your studies. Unlike the primary fund, this trust is legally structured to prevent anyone but you from accessing it, with myself as trustee until the trigger date." He slid a document toward me. "This trust currently contains approximately $230,000, not enough for a complete Stanford education inclusive of graduate studies, but sufficient to address the immediate shortfall created by your parents' misappropriation." The figure momentarily stunned me into silence. $230,000, nearly enough to cover Stanford's undergraduate tuition and expenses. I don't know what to say," I finally managed. "This is incredible, Grandpa. But why didn't you tell me about this before? I had intended to reveal it closer to your graduation, once your university plans were finalized, he explained. I didn't anticipate that your parents would deplete the primary fund, particularly after years of assuring me they were contributing to it themselves. The server returned with my hot chocolate, providing a momentary pause in our conversation. When she departed, my grandfather continued in a more measured tone. There are, however, certain conditions I wish to discuss regarding this trust. I nodded, unsurprised. My grandfather had always believed that privileges came with corresponding responsibilities. First, while these funds are legally yours to direct toward your education, I would strongly encourage maintaining a portion in reserve for graduate studies. Stanford's bioengineering program typically leads students toward advanced degrees, and having financial flexibility at that juncture will be advantageous. That makes perfect sense, I agreed, already mentally calculating how to balance immediate needs with future planning. Second, he continued, I expect regular academic updates, not merely grades, but substantive discussion of your research interests, challenges, and intellectual development. My interest isn't supervisory but collaborative. Despite my retirement, I maintain connections throughout the scientific community that might prove useful to your studies. I'd welcome that, I said sincerely. Our academic discussions had always been highlights of our relationship. And finally, he said, his tone shifting slightly, I must address the wedding situation. I tensed involuntarily. Despite the financial solution he'd presented, the emotional betrayal of my parents' decision remained a raw wound. While I understand your anger toward your parents and sister, I want to caution you against actions you might later regret. Family relationships, once fractured, can be difficult to repair. This was not the direction I had expected. Are you suggesting I should just forgive them? Pretend everything's fine? Not at all, he replied firmly. What they've done is inexcusable. Prioritizing an extravagant social event over your education demonstrates a fundamental failure of parental responsibility. However, publicly confronting them at the wedding would only create a permanent rift while doing nothing to remedy the situation. He paused, stirring his tea thoughtfully. Sometimes, Olivia, the most powerful response to mistreatment isn't dramatic confrontation, but quiet success. Your achievement will be a more lasting statement than any scene you might create. I considered his words, recognizing their wisdom despite my lingering desire for some form of justice or acknowledgement. So I should just participate in the wedding as if nothing's happened? Participate with dignity, he clarified. Fulfill your promised obligations without enthusiasm or additional effort. Then, once the event has concluded, you may present your parents with the fact of your attendance at Stanford as a decision made rather than a request for their approval. The strategy appealed to the part of me that had always valued academic achievement over emotional drama. I think I can manage that approach. Good. Now, regarding immediate next steps. He was interrupted by my phone buzzing with an incoming call from my mother. I silenced it without answering. They'll be wondering where I am, I explained. I usually come straight home after school. You should return soon, he agreed. But first, there's a practical matter to address. While the trust funds will be available for your university expenses beginning in September, you'll need resources for the summer months, particularly if you secure a research position through Dr. Sorensen. He removed an envelope from his portfolio and placed it beside the trust documents. This contains a debit card connected to a checking account in your name, with sufficient funds for summer living expenses. I've taken the liberty of reserving a studio apartment near the University Research Center should you require it. The comprehensiveness of his planning amazed me. You've thought of everything. Not everything, he corrected with a small smile. Merely the practical foundations, the real work, your scholarship application, research proposal, and academic journey remains entirely yours to shape. As we prepared to leave the cafe, my grandfather gathered the documents into his portfolio and handed it to me. Review these tonight and we'll speak again tomorrow. I've scheduled a meeting with my attorney for Saturday morning to formalize your access to the trust. Thank you doesn't seem adequate, I said, struggling to express the mixture of gratitude and relief overwhelming me. Your academic success will be thanks enough, he replied simply. Then, with uncharacteristic emotion, he added, I've always seen in you the scientific mind I'd hoped to nurture in your mother. She chose a different path, which was her right. But I will not stand idle while your potential is sacrificed for superficial social aspirations. Outside the cafe, we parted ways, my grandfather returning to his hotel, me cycling home with the leather portfolio securely in my backpack. The afternoon's revelations had transformed my outlook completely. Where yesterday I'd seen insurmountable obstacles, today I recognized a challenging but navigable path forward. At home, I found my mother waiting in the kitchen, her expression oscillating between concern and irritation. Where have you been? I've called 3 times. We need to discuss the seating arrangements for the rehearsal dinner. Sorry, I was working on scholarship applications at the library, I said, the partial truth coming easily. My phone was on silent. Scholarships are fine, but your sister's wedding takes priority right now, she insisted. Everyone in this family needs to contribute. Looking at her, the woman who had redirected my education fund to floral arrangements and champagne fountains, I felt an unexpected calm rather than the anger that had consumed me recently. My grandfather was right. The most effective response wasn't confrontation, but focused determination. I'll help with the seating charts, I agreed neutrally. After I finish my AP Physics review, the exam is Monday. There's barely 2 weeks until the wedding, she protested. These arrangements can't wait. Neither can my exams, I countered evenly. I'll be down in an hour. Without waiting for her response, I headed upstairs, the weight of the portfolio, in my backpack a tangible reminder of the future now securely within my reach. For the first time since the devastating revelation about my college fund, I felt completely certain of my path forward. My parents had made their choice, prioritizing Melissa's social aspirations over my academic future. Now, thanks to my grandfather's foresight, I had the freedom to make my own choice, one that would shape not just my education, but the person I would become. As I settled at my desk and opened my physics textbook, a sense of purpose filled me. The next few weeks would require careful navigation of family obligations, scholarship applications, and academic preparations. But beyond that challenging period lay Stanford, research opportunities, and the bioengineering career I'd worked toward for years. My grandfather's unexpected intervention hadn't merely solved a financial problem. It had demonstrated what genuine support for someone's potential looks like. Someday, I promised myself, I would pay that lesson forward. The next morning, I woke early to an email from Dr. Leonard Sorensen, the tissue engineering researcher Mrs. Chamberlain had contacted on my behalf. He requested a virtual meeting that afternoon to discuss both the scholarship proposal and a potential summer research position. The email's professional tone conveyed neither enthusiasm nor discouragement, just straightforward academic inquiry about my qualifications and research interests. I responded immediately, confirming my availability while attaching my academics, records, and a brief summary of my previous science fair projects. Then I spent the next hour reviewing Dr. Sorensen's published research, taking detailed notes on his methodologies and findings. If this meeting could potentially solve both my scholarship needs and summer plans, I needed to be thoroughly prepared. Downstairs, I found my father at the kitchen table, reviewing wedding expense spreadsheets with a furrowed brow. He glanced up as I entered, his expression shifting to one of cautious neutrality. "Good morning," he said, closing his laptop slightly. "Your mother mentioned you were working on scholarship applications yesterday." Yes, I confirmed, pouring myself coffee. Stanford's financial aid office connected me with a specialized engineering scholarship. The application is due next week. He nodded slowly. That's good initiative. Though I hope you're being realistic about the possibilities. Even with scholarships, the financial gap would be substantial. I took a careful sip of coffee, considering how much to reveal. While part of me wanted to immediately announce my grandfather's intervention, I recognized the strategic advantage of withholding that information until all arrangements were finalized. I'm exploring multiple options, I replied neutrally. The scholarship is just one approach. My father shifted uncomfortably. Olivia, your mother and I have been discussing the situation. We recognize that the timing of our decision about the college fund was unfortunate. After the wedding, we're planning to establish a new savings plan for your education. The belated acknowledgement of their unfortunate timing, as if the issue were merely when they'd informed me rather than the decision itself, stoked my indignation. More telling was their proposed solution, vague promises of future savings after the money had already been spent. That's thoughtful, I said, keeping my tone even. But given that I'd need to make enrollment decisions and payments well before any new savings could accumulate, I need to focus on immediate solutions. Of course, he agreed, looking relieved, that I hadn't responded with anger. Just know that we do care about your education. The wedding expenses simply created a temporary financial constraint. A temporary financial constraint that they had chosen to resolve by sacrificing my future, rather than scaling back Melissa's celebration or asking the supposedly well-connected Thatchers to contribute more. The selective nature of their financial priorities remained unacknowledged. I understand priorities require choices, I said, the double meaning clear to me if not to him. Speaking of which, I have a virtual meeting with a research professor this afternoon. Would it be all right if I use the home office for privacy? The office? He frowned slightly. Your mother was planning to use it for final wedding calls with the venue coordinator. I'll only need it from 3 to 4, I clarified. The meeting could potentially lead to both scholarship funding and a summer research position. He hesitated, then nodded. I'll let your mother know, but please make sure you're available this evening for the final review of the rehearsal dinner arrangements. The event is next Friday, and everything needs to be finalized this weekend. I'll be available, I promised, already mentally calculating how to balance wedding obligations with my scholarship application timeline. After my father left for work, I retreated to my bedroom to prepare for both my meeting with Dr. Sorensen and my AP Physics exam on Monday. The dual focus actually proved beneficial, as the technical concepts I was reviewing for the exam helped clarify potential approaches for the research proposal. At noon, my phone rang with my grandfather's number. Good morning, Olivia. I've confirmed our meeting with Ms. Harrington, my attorney, for tomorrow at 10. Are you available? Yes, definitely, I confirmed, though I may need to bring some scholarship materials to work on afterward. The application deadline is Wednesday. Bring whatever you need, he replied. Ms. Harrington's office has a comfortable conference room you can use after our meeting. How are things at home? I described my brief conversation with my father, including his mention of future savings plans. My grandfather responded, a wealth of skepticism in that single syllable. Convenient promises after the fact. Have you reviewed the trust documents I provided? Yes. I read through everything last night. The provisions seem straightforward, though some of the legal terminology was unfamiliar. Ms. Harrington will explain anything unclear tomorrow. She's also prepared a letter formally notifying your parents of the trust's existence and its designated purpose, should that become necessary after you've secured your Stanford position. The methodical way my grandfather approached the situation, addressing not just the financial aspects but the potential family fallout, reassured me tremendously. Unlike my parents' impulsive decision-making, his careful planning considered both immediate needs and long-term implications. "Thank you for thinking of everything," I said sincerely. "Not everything," he corrected, echoing his words from yesterday. "Merely the structural elements, the substance, your academic work, and future contributions remains entirely your domain." After our call ended, I received a text from Zoe. "Mom talked to her colleague in financial aid. Call me ASAP." I immediately called, curious what her mother had discovered. "Liv," Zoe answered excitedly. "Mom spoke with her friend who works in financial aid at Berkeley. She said what your parents did might actually qualify you for additional aid under something called Special Circumstances Review. If you can document that the funds were designated for your education but were used elsewhere without your consent, some universities will reconsider your aid package." "That's incredibly helpful," I said, adding this information to my growing list of potential resources. "I have a meeting with a research professor this afternoon about a specialized scholarship. Plus, my grandfather is helping with some unexpected options." "Your grandfather? The engineering professor?" "Former engineering professor," I corrected. "And yes, he's actually in town now, helping navigate this whole situation." "That's amazing," Zoe said warmly. "I always liked him from the stories you've told. He seems like someone who actually values education and achievement." "He does," I agreed, reflecting on the stark contrast between my grandfather's immediate practical support and my parents' vague future promises. It's been clarifying to see who genuinely supports my goals and who just gives them lip service. "Speaking of lip service," Zoe transitioned, "how's Weddingzilla? Has Melissa shown any recognition that her big day came at the expense of your entire future?" "Not really. She's fully embraced the narrative that I'm being selfish for not enthusiastically celebrating her once-in-a-lifetime event while adjusting my educational expectations." "Unbelievable," Zoe muttered, "though actually completely believable, given your family dynamics." After catching up on a few more details, including Zoe's offer to help with my scholarship application if needed, I returned to my preparation for the afternoon's meeting with Dr. Sorensen. At precisely 3 o'clock, I sat in my parents' home office, professionally dressed and surrounded by notes on tissue engineering innovations. When the video call connected, I found myself facing a man in his early 50s with thoughtful eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, his office backdrop lined with scientific journals and a whiteboard covered in complex molecular diagrams. "Ms. Caldwell," he greeted me with professional courtesy. "Catherine Chamberlain speaks very highly of your scientific aptitude. She mentioned you're interested in both our summer research program and the Westfield Foundation Scholarship." "Yes, Dr. Sorensen," I confirmed. "Your guest lecture on biocompatible scaffolds for tissue regeneration aligned closely with my independent research interests. I've been working on biodegradable polymers for medical applications, focusing on controlled release mechanisms." His expression shifted from polite interest to more focused attention. "Controlled release mechanisms? That's advanced work for a high school student. What specific polymers have you been investigating?" For the next 20 minutes, our conversation flowed through increasingly technical territory: polymer degradation rates, hydrophilic-hydrophobic balances, and potential applications in targeted drug delivery. Dr. Sorensen asked pointed questions that tested the depth of my understanding, occasionally nodding with approval at my responses. "Your knowledge base is impressive," he acknowledged finally. "Mrs. Chamberlain mentioned you've been accepted to Stanford's bioengineering program?" "Yes, though I'm facing unexpected financial challenges," I explained carefully. "The Westfield Scholarship would be transformative in making my attendance possible." He nodded thoughtfully. "The Westfield is exceptionally competitive, typically awarded to one incoming student annually from a pool of 50 to 60 qualified applicants. However, Your research foundation gives you a legitimate chance." He leaned forward slightly, his tone becoming more directed. "For the proposal component, I'd recommend focusing on extending your polymer work toward neural tissue applications. There's growing interest in biomaterials that can support nervous system regeneration while delivering neuroprotective compounds at controlled rates." The suggestion immediately sparked connections in my mind, like scaffolds that could simultaneously provide structural support for axon regrowth while releasing factors that prevent scarring at the injury site. "Precisely," he confirmed, looking pleased. "The proposal needn't detail experimental protocols. They're looking for innovative thinking and conceptual understanding rather than technical specifications at this stage." He paused, considering something before continuing. "Regarding the summer position, our program typically selects undergraduates with laboratory coursework completed. However, given your evident preparation and Stanford admission, I'd be willing to consider your application if you can provide detailed recommendations addressing your laboratory skills specifically." "Mrs. Chamberlain would certainly provide one," I replied. "And Dr. Williams, who supervised my regional science fair project on biodegradable polymers, could address my laboratory techniques in detail." "Have them send recommendations directly to my university email by Monday," he instructed. "I'll review them and make a decision regarding the summer position by Wednesday. For the Westfield Scholarship, I'm willing to review your proposal draft if you can send it to me by Sunday evening." The tight timeline was challenging but manageable. "I'll have it to you by then. Thank you for this opportunity, Dr. Sorensen." As our meeting concluded, I felt simultaneously energized and daunted by the work ahead. Developing a competitive research proposal while balancing wedding obligations and AP exam preparation would require exceptional time management, but the potential rewards, scholarship funding, summer research experience, and valuable mentorship made the effort worthwhile. I immediately began outlining the neural tissue engineering proposal, the scientific challenge providing welcome focus after days of family tension. 2 hours passed in productive concentration before my mother knocked at the bedroom door. "Olivia, we need you downstairs. The wedding planner is here to finalize the ceremony procession details." Reality intruded on my academic momentum, reminding me of the competing obligations before me. With reluctance, I saved my work and headed downstairs, where my mother, Melissa, and an elegantly dressed woman with a tablet computer waited in the living room. "Finally," Melissa said impatiently, "we've been waiting. This is Vanessa, our wedding coordinator. We need to confirm your responsibilities for both the ceremony and reception." For the next hour, I participated in the detailed planning session with outward cooperation, while my mind continued processing neural regeneration concepts in the background. I confirmed my bridesmaid duties, rehearsal dinner participation, and day of schedule while mentally organizing research literature relevant to my proposal. When the wedding coordinator finally departed, Melissa turned to me with narrowed eyes. "You seemed distracted the entire time. This wedding is happening in 2 weeks, Olivia. Whatever academic thing you're obsessing over can wait." The irony of her statement, that my education should wait while her wedding took precedence, when my education funds had already been sacrificed for that very event, was almost too perfect. But remembering my grandfather's advice about dignity rather than confrontation, I simply nodded. "I'm managing both priorities," I replied evenly. "My scholarship application is due Wednesday, and my AP exams start Monday. I'll fulfill all my wedding responsibilities while completing my academic obligations." "That scholarship is a long shot anyway," she dismissed. "Mom said Stanford is completely unrealistic now. You should focus on what's actually happening, not chase impossible dreams." The casual cruelty of her statement momentarily stole my breath. My admission to one of the world's premier engineering programs, earned through years of dedicated work, reduced to an impossible dream, while her elaborate party was positioned as the family priority deserving my full attention. But as I looked at my sister, so confident in her entitled perspective, so certain of her centrality in family priorities. I felt an unexpected sense of clarity rather than anger. In 2 weeks, her wedding would be over, relegated to photo, albums and memories. Meanwhile, my educational journey was just beginning, with opportunities that would extend far beyond a single celebrated day. "I'll manage both," I repeated simply, turning toward the stairs. "I need to get back to my proposal now." As I returned to my neural engineering outline, I recognized that this challenging period was teaching me something essential about determining my own priorities, regardless of others' expectations or demands. In this way, my parents' betrayal had inadvertently delivered a crucial life lesson. My future was ultimately my responsibility, and I had the capacity to shape it through persistence, strategic planning, and focused determination. The scholarship application might indeed be a long shot, as Melissa had dismissively suggested. But unlike the wedding that consumed my family's attention, my academic pursuits represented not just a single achievement, but a pathway to meaningful contribution. That recognition alone made every hour of balanced obligation worthwhile. Saturday morning arrived with a crisp clarity that belied the emotional complexity of the day ahead. My meeting with grandfather's attorney was scheduled for 10, followed by intensive work on my scholarship proposal, all while the family home transformed into wedding headquarters as decorations arrived and relatives began filtering in from out of town. I dressed in a simple but professional outfit, dark jeans and a navy blazer over a white blouse, appropriate for both a legal meeting and the casual family gathering scheduled for that afternoon. Downstairs, I found my mother directing 2 delivery men arranging elaborate floral centerpiece prototypes across our dining table. "Olivia, there you are," she said, barely glancing my way. "Aunt Patricia and Uncle Richard are arriving at noon. I need you to pick them up from the airport." "I can't today," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "I have an important meeting at 10, followed by scholarship work. I mentioned this yesterday." My mother straightened, her attention finally fully on me. What meeting could possibly be more important than family this weekend? Everyone is pitching in for your sister's wedding. "It's regarding my education," I explained simply. "I made this commitment before I knew about the airport pickup. Perhaps Dad could adjust his schedule, or we could arrange a rideshare service." Before she could respond, my father entered from the kitchen, coffee mug in hand. "What's the issue?" My mother's expression tightened with frustration. "Olivia has suddenly scheduled some meeting during the peak of wedding preparations. She can't pick up my brother and his wife from the airport." "It's not sudden," I corrected calmly. "I mentioned it yesterday. The meeting concerns my college funding situation." My father's expression shifted to one of concern. "What kind of meeting? With the financial aid office?" I hesitated briefly, then decided a partial truth would suffice. "With an attorney who specializes in educational funding options. The consultation was difficult to schedule, and postponing would impact my application timeline." My parents exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret, concern mixed with something else. Suspicion, perhaps. "Who arranged this meeting?" my father asked carefully. "I did," I replied, the technical truth providing solid ground. "After researching options following our conversation about the college fund." Another weighted look passed between them, but before either could probe further, the doorbell rang, announcing more deliveries. My mother sighed with exasperation. "Fine. Your father will handle the airport pickup, but please be back by 3 for the family welcome gathering. Your absence would be noticed and require explanation." "I'll be back by 3, I promised, relieved to have navigated the immediate obstacle without direct confrontation. 20 minutes later, I cycled downtown to the professional building where Ms. Harrington, my grandfather's attorney, maintained her offices. He waited in the lobby, his posture as straight as ever despite his age, reviewing documents from his leather portfolio. "Right on time," he noted approvingly as I approached. "Ms. Harrington is ready for us. We were shown into a comfortable conference room where a woman in her mid-50s greeted us with professional warmth. Eleanor Harrington had the precise diction of someone accustomed to ensuring every word carried its proper legal weight, but her manner was reassuringly straightforward. "Ms. Caldwell, it's a pleasure to meet you. Your grandfather speaks very highly of your academic achievements." "Thank you for accommodating this meeting on a weekend," I replied, settling into one of the leather chairs as she distributed document folders to each of us. "Let's begin with an overview of the trust structure," Ms. Harrington suggested, opening her folder to reveal organized sections with color-coded tabs. "As your grandfather explained, this educational trust becomes accessible to you upon either your 18th birthday or college enrollment, whichever occurs first. Since your Stanford enrollment would precede your birthday, we'll focus on that trigger event." For the next hour, she walked me through the legal specifics with remarkable clarity, explaining distribution mechanisms, tax implications, and procedural requirements in terms I could understand, despite my lack of financial experience. My grandfather occasionally interjected with clarifying questions or additional context, but mostly allowed Ms. Harrington to lead the technical explanation. "Now," she said, turning to a new section, "regarding the potential family complications, your grandfather has informed me of the situation with your primary college fund. While what your parents did was ethically questionable, it was likely within their legal rights as custodians of that account." She leaned forward slightly, her expression serious but not unkind. "However, this trust is structured differently, with ironclad protections against similar redirection. Your grandfather is the trustee until the trigger date, at which point you become the beneficiary with direct access for qualified educational expenses." "And my parents cannot access or influence these funds?" I confirmed. "Correct. They have no legal standing regarding this trust. Once activated, the funds transfer to a specialized educational account in your name, with transactions requiring documentation of educational purpose but not parental approval." As Ms. Harrington continued explaining the practical mechanics of the trust activation, I felt a profound sense of security settling over me. This wasn't just financial protection, it was intellectual protection, a safeguarding of my future, potential against short-sighted family priorities. "I've prepared notification letters," Ms. Harrington added, indicating another tabbed section, "should it become necessary to formally inform your parents of the trust's existence and purpose. Your grandfather suggested waiting until your Stanford position is secured before presenting this information." "That seems wise," I agreed, though I'm hoping direct confrontation won't be necessary. "Hope for the best, prepare for all contingencies," my grandfather commented, his engineer's mindset evident in the practical approach. By the meeting's conclusion, I had a comprehensive understanding of both my financial resources and the procedural steps required to access them. Ms. Harrington provided her direct contact information, encouraging me to reach out with any questions as the process advanced. "I'll leave you the conference room for your scholarship work," she offered as we wrapped up. "It's quiet, private, and available until 5 today." After my grandfather departed for a lunch meeting with former colleagues, I settled in with my laptop and research materials, grateful for the professional environment so conducive to focused work. For the next 3 hours, I developed my neural tissue engineering proposal, building on Dr. Sorensen's suggestion to focus on combined structural support and neuroprotective compound delivery. The work absorbed me completely, the technical challenges, providing welcome respite from family tensions. By 2:30, I had completed a substantial draft, with just the methodology section requiring refinement, before sending to Dr. Sorensen for review. As I packed up my materials, Ms. Harrington appeared briefly to check on my progress. "Your grandfather mentioned you're juggling these academic priorities with significant family obligations this weekend." "Yes, my sister's wedding is next weekend, with various events beginning today," I explained. "The timing is challenging." She nodded thoughtfully. I've observed throughout my career that the most successful people are those who can maintain focus on long-term goals despite short-term distractions, however elaborate those distractions might be. Her subtle reference to the wedding as a distraction, rather than the central family event everyone else considered it, brought an unexpected smile to my face. "That's a perspective I appreciate," I admitted. "Your grandfather has that quality," she noted. "The ability to distinguish between the momentarily urgent and the genuinely important. It seems you've inherited that discernment." The simple observation carried unexpected weight. Throughout this ordeal, I'd felt primarily like the victim of my parents' misguided priorities. Ms. Harrington's comment reframed my experience, suggesting that my response to the situation reflected not just resilience, but a valuable quality, worth recognizing and developing. I cycled home with renewed determination, arriving precisely at 3 o'clock as promised. The house had transformed in my absence. Flower arrangements adorned every surface, welcome bags for out-of-town guests lined the entryway, and the backyard was now partially covered by an elegant canopy for the evening's informal gathering. Inside, I found the living room filled with relatives I hadn't seen in months or years. My mother's brother and his wife from Phoenix, cousins from Chicago, my father's sister and her husband from Seattle. Melissa held court near the fireplace, resplendent in a white designer dress clearly selected to foreshadow her bridal attire, Jackson faithfully by her side as she detailed their honeymoon plans for an appreciative audience. My mother intercepted me near the doorway, her smile fixed, but her eyes conveying warning. "There you are. Everyone's been asking about you. Please circulate and be sociable. This weekend is about family coming together for your sister." The directive was familiar. Be present, be pleasant, but don't draw attention away from Melissa's spotlight. I'd played this supporting role throughout our childhood, standing in the background during her dance recitals, piano performances, and graduation celebrations. The difference now was my internal response to the assignment. Where once I'd accepted my secondary position and family priorities as natural, even deserved, I now recognized it as a constructed dynamic that reflected my parents' values, not objective reality. This recognition didn't make me angry. Instead, it granted a strange new freedom. I could participate in the expected social performance while maintaining my internal focus on what truly mattered. "Of course," I agreed easily. "I'll make the rounds." For the next hour, I navigated family conversations with practiced skill, answering questions about school, expressing appropriate enthusiasm for Melissa's wedding details, and deflecting inquiries about my own future plans with non-committal responses about exploring options. When Aunt Patricia directly asked about Stanford, I simply mentioned that financial arrangements were still being determined. Through it all, I maintained a kind of dual consciousness, outwardly participating in the family celebration while inwardly preserving my focus on the scholarship proposal, neural tissue engineering concepts occasionally surfacing amid wedding small talk. During a brief moment alone in the kitchen while refreshing my water glass, I received a text from my grandfather. Confirmed appointment with Stanford Financial Office for Monday morning. Virtual meeting to discuss trust fund integration with aid package. Details to follow. The message reinforced what the day had repeatedly demonstrated, that parallel tracks could be maintained, that family obligations need not derail educational progress, that beneath the surface of apparent compliance, I could advance my own priorities with quiet determination. When I returned to the gathering, I found Melissa gesturing me over to her circle of admirers. "There's my little sister, Olivia. Mrs. Thatcher was just asking about your college plans." Jackson's mother, an elegant woman whose approval clearly meant everything to my parents and sister, turned her appraising gaze toward me. "Melissa mentioned you received some impressive university acceptances. Have you decided where you'll attend?" I felt multiple sets of eyes on me, Melissa's warning glare, my mother's anxious attention from across the room, various relatives curious about my response. The question created a perfect opportunity for either embarrassing disclosure about the redirected college fund or meek acceptance of the community college narrative my parents had begun constructing. Instead, I chose a third path, one that neither concealed nor confronted the underlying tension. I'm planning to attend Stanford's bioengineering program, I stated simply. I'm currently finalizing scholarship applications to supplement my educational funding. Mrs. Thatcher's eyebrows rose with genuine impression. Stanford? That's extraordinary. Their engineering programs are world-class. What area interests you specifically? Tissue engineering and regenerative medicine, I replied, warming to the rare opportunity to discuss my academic interests at a family gathering. I'm particularly focused on biomaterials that could support neural regeneration. Fascinating, she responded, her interest seeming genuine rather than merely polite. My nephew conducts research in biomedical engineering at Johns Hopkins. The field is advancing remarkably quickly. Melissa, visibly uncomfortable with this diversion from wedding topics, attempted to redirect the conversation. Speaking of advancing quickly, Jackson and I are considering moving up our timeline. For starting a family. Maybe even trying for a honeymoon baby. The announcement successfully recaptured the group's attention, allowing me to step back slightly from the circle. As Mrs. Thatcher and the others responded to Melissa's revelation with predictable enthusiasm, I caught my mother watching me with an unreadable expression, something between concern and calculation in her gaze. Later, as evening approached and the party moved to the backyard for casual dinner service, my father found me helping arrange dessert platters in the kitchen. "Your mother mentioned you told Caroline Thatcher you're attending Stanford," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "I thought we agreed that was unrealistic given the current circumstances." "I said I'm planning to attend," I clarified, which is accurate. I'm actively pursuing multiple funding avenues, including the special engineering scholarship. He leaned against the counter, studying me with newfound attention. "You seem very confident for someone facing a significant financial shortfall. Did your meeting this morning provide some unexpected solution?" The direct question created a decision point. Reveal my grandfather's intervention now, or maintain strategic silence until arrangements were finalized. Remembering both my grandfather's and Ms. Harrington's advice about timing, I chose a response that was technically true while preserving my options. "The meeting clarified several possibilities," I replied. "I'm still exploring all avenues. But yes, I'm increasingly confident about Stanford." My father's expression shifted subtly, something like suspicion forming behind his eyes. "Olivia, if you're counting on loans that would require our co-signature or financial commitment, we need to have a realistic conversation about family resources. After the wedding—" "I understand our family's current priorities," I interrupted gently. "I'm not counting on additional financial support from you or Mom. The solutions I'm pursuing are independent." Before he could probe further, Melissa burst into the kitchen, radiating excitement. "Dad, Jackson's parents want to discuss the real estate options they're considering as our wedding gift. They're thinking either the condo downtown or helping with a down payment on that colonial in Westbrook Estates." And just like that, my father's attention shifted completely. Financial concerns about my education instantly forgotten in the face of Melissa's housing prospects. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. My education requiring independent solutions, while my sister's material comforts remained the family's central concern. As they hurried back to the gathering, leaving me alone with the dessert platters, I felt neither anger nor resentment, but a calm certainty that I was on the right path. The weekend's wedding festivities would continue around me, demanding my presence but not my emotional investment. Meanwhile, beneath the surface of familial celebration, I would steadily advance toward the future I'd earned through years of dedicated work. Tomorrow would bring more wedding preparations, but also critical hours of scholarship proposal refinement. Monday would bring both AP exams and the financial meeting with Stanford. The dual tracks would continue, parallel but separate, until the moment they could finally diverge completely. For now, I arranged cookies on porcelain platters with careful precision, a small smile playing at the corners of my mouth as I contemplated the invisible but significant progress occurring beneath the elaborate wedding preparations surrounding me. Sunday morning brought unexpected quiet to the house. Most relatives had retreated to their hotels to rest before the afternoon's engagement brunch at an upscale restaurant downtown. I seized the opportunity, settling at my desk before 7 with fresh coffee and renewed focus on my scholarship proposal. Dr. Sorensen had requested the draft by evening, which meant I needed to complete and polish the document before the family obligations resumed. I reviewed my work from yesterday, refined the methodology section, and added a compelling conclusion that connected the proposed research to broader implications for spinal cord injury treatment. Just before noon, as I was proofreading the final draft, a knock at my bedroom door interrupted my concentration. My mother entered without waiting for a response, already dressed in the cream-colored designer outfit she'd selected for the brunch. "Olivia, you need to start getting ready. We're leaving in an hour," she said, her gaze taking in my casual clothes and the papers spread across my desk. "Why aren't you dressed yet?" "I'm finalizing my scholarship proposal," I explained, saving the document before turning to face her. "It's due to my faculty reviewer this evening. I'll be ready in time for the brunch, I promise." She stepped further into the room, her expression shifting from irritation to something more evaluative. "Your father mentioned you seemed unusually confident about Stanford yesterday. He's concerned you might be forming unrealistic expectations." "I'm pursuing viable options," I replied carefully. "The engineering scholarship is substantial, and I'm exploring additional resources that wouldn't require your financial involvement." "What additional resources?" she pressed. "Student loans at your age would require our co-signature, which simply isn't feasible right now with the wedding expenses and potentially helping Melissa and Jackson with their home purchase. The casual confirmation of their continued financial prioritization of my sister might have stung days earlier, but now it merely reinforced the wisdom of my independent path." "I understand your financial commitments," I assured her. "I'm not asking for assistance." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Have you been in contact with your grandfather? Beyond that initial call, I mean." The direct question caught me off guard. Though I'd prepared for eventual disclosure about the trust, I hadn't anticipated her connecting these dots so quickly. "We've spoken a few times," I acknowledged, neither confirming nor denying the financial implications of those conversations. Something hardened in her expression. "Olivia, your grandfather has always had a complicated relationship with this family. If he's making promises about your education, you should be very cautious. His support often comes with expectations and conditions that aren't immediately apparent." The warning struck me as both ironic and revealing, my mother cautioning me about conditional support when my parents had literally redirected my educational funds to my sister's wedding. More interesting was her characterization of my grandfather's expectations as problematic, when those expectations had always centered around academic excellence and intellectual integrity. "I appreciate your concern," I said neutrally. "I'll be ready for the brunch by 1 o'clock. She seemed about to press further, but instead nodded tersely. "Wear the blue dress with the cardigan. The Thatchers will be there, and appearances matter." After she left, I completed my final review of the scholarship proposal, created a professional PDF with proper formatting, and sent it to Dr. Sorensen with a polite email thanking him for his mentorship and requesting any feedback he could provide before the Wednesday submission deadline. Then I changed into the approved outfit, applied minimal makeup, and joined my family downstairs precisely at 1 o'clock. My father gave me an appraising look as I descended the stairs. "You look appropriate," he commented, which from him constituted high praise regarding appearance. "We need to leave now to arrive on time." The engagement brunch occupied a private room at Riverdale's most exclusive restaurant, the kind of establishment where prices weren't listed on menus, and staff appeared silently when needed. Melissa and Jackson held court at the center table, surrounded by his family and closest friends, while our relatives filled the surrounding tables in a carefully orchestrated seating arrangement that reflected perceived status and importance. I found myself seated between cousin Rebecca from Chicago and Jackson's second cousin, a finance professional whose name I immediately forgot as he launched into a monologue about investment strategies for young people that seemed oddly divorced from the realities of actual young people's finances. Throughout the three-course meal, I maintained the pleasant, attentive demeanor expected of me while mentally reviewing key elements of my scholarship proposal and preparing for tomorrow's AP Physics exam. The dual-track existence I'd been cultivating, outwardly, participating in wedding festivities while inwardly focused on academic advancement, had become almost second nature. Midway through the main course, my phone vibrated in my clutch purse. While normally I would never check messages during a formal family function, a reflexive concern about my scholarship submission prompted me to discreetly glance at the screen while pretending to check the time. The notification revealed an email from Dr. Sorensen with the subject line, "Proposal feedback, urgent." My heart rate accelerated. Urgent feedback could indicate serious flaws requiring substantial revision before the Wednesday deadline. With the rehearsal dinner scheduled for Friday and wedding preparations intensifying daily, finding extensive revision time would be nearly impossible. "Would you excuse me for a moment?" I murmured to my conversational partners, slipping away toward the restroom area where I could review the message privately. In a quiet corner of the restaurant's elegantly appointed lounge, I opened the email with trepidation. "Ms. Caldwell, I've reviewed your neural tissue engineering proposal and find it exceptional, particularly your integration of biodegradable polymer technology with targeted growth factor delivery mechanisms. The concept is both innovative and scientifically sound, representing graduate-level understanding of the underlying principles. Rather than suggesting revisions, I've taken the liberty of forwarding your proposal directly to Dr. Helena Westfield, who established the Scholarship Foundation. She's expressed immediate interest in your work, particularly given its alignment with her own research in neural regeneration. She's requested a virtual interview tomorrow at 5 p.m. I recognize this is extremely short notice, but given the application deadline and her specific interest in your approach, I strongly encourage you to accommodate this request if at all possible. Please confirm your availability as soon as convenient. Regards, Dr. Leonard Sorensen." I read the message twice, scarcely believing its contents. Not only had Dr. Sorensen approved my proposal without requiring revisions, but he'd forwarded it directly to the scholarship's founder, bypassing several evaluation stages in the process. An interview request with Dr. Westfield herself represented an extraordinary opportunity, one that potentially placed me ahead of dozens of other qualified applicants. The timing, however, created yet another scheduling challenge. Tomorrow afternoon was already committed to AP exam review, followed by my financial aid meeting with Stanford, and culminating in a family dinner with Melissa's future in-laws. Finding time for proper interview preparation, let alone the interview itself, would require careful navigation. As I contemplated my response, Mrs. Thatcher entered the lounge area, her expression registering mild surprise at finding me there. "Olivia, isn't it? Taking a break from the celebration?" she inquired, her tone genuinely curious rather than accusatory. "Just responding to an urgent email about my scholarship application," I explained honestly. "I've been invited to interview with the foundation director tomorrow." Rather than dismissing this academic intrusion into wedding festivities as I might have expected from someone in Melissa's orbit, Mrs. Thatcher's expression reflected genuine interest. "For Stanford's bioengineering program, correct?" "That's quite an achievement. My late father was an engineer. He would have been fascinated by the work you described yesterday." The unexpected personal connection and sincere engagement caught me off guard. "Thank you. The field combines several disciplines in ways that could potentially transform medical treatment approaches." She nodded thoughtfully. Innovation often happens at intersections between established fields. That was my father's philosophy as well. She gestured toward the private dining room. We should return before our absence is noted, but I'd enjoy hearing more about your research interests another time. As we walked back together, Mrs. Thatcher's respectful interest in my academic pursuits, in stark contrast to my own family's dismissive attitude, reinforced something I'd begun to recognize throughout this challenging period. My worth wasn't defined by my parents' assessment or my sister's overshadowing presence. External validation from objective observers like Dr. Sorensen, my grandfather, and even Mrs. Thatcher confirmed that my academic achievements deserved the serious consideration my family had failed to provide. Back at my table, I discreetly composed a reply to Dr. Sorensen, confirming my availability for the interview and expressing gratitude for his support. I then sent a brief text to my grandfather, updating him on this significant development. His response came quickly. Excellent news. Use my hotel suite for the interview. Professional environment without family distractions. I'll arrange transportation. The simple offer of a quiet, appropriate space represented exactly the practical support I needed, addressing immediate logistics while leaving the substantive work entirely to me. Once again, my grandfather demonstrated his understanding of effective mentorship, providing structural assistance that enabled rather than replaced personal achievement. The brunch concluded with elaborate toasts celebrating Melissa and Jackson's impending union. Crystal glasses clinked, professional photographers captured perfectly composed moments, and attendees exchanged knowing smiles, acknowledging the social significance of this alliance between families. Throughout it all, I participated with appropriate politeness while maintaining my internal focus on tomorrow's multiple challenges. AP exam in the morning, Stanford financial meeting at noon, Westfield scholarship interview at 5, and family, dinner at 7. Each represented a critical piece of my future, advancing in parallel with the wedding preparations that consumed everyone else's attention. On the drive home, Melissa chattered excitedly about brunch details, who had worn what, which Thatcher relatives had been particularly complimentary, how Jackson's mother had hinted at additional wedding gifts beyond the already generous housing contribution. Mrs. Thatcher mentioned she enjoyed speaking with you, she said suddenly, turning to face me from the front passenger seat. What did you talk about? My research interests, I replied honestly. Her father was an engineer. Melissa frowned, slightly. Try not to bore people with academic stuff this week, Liv. The focus should be on relationships and celebrations, not school projects. From the driver's seat, my father added his perspective. Your sister's right, Olivia. There's a time and place for academic discussions, and social gatherings around the wedding, aren't it? People are here to celebrate, not hear about laboratory work. Rather than arguing, I simply nodded, recognizing again how fundamentally different our values had become. Where they saw educational pursuits as inappropriate intrusions into social occasions, I increasingly viewed elaborate social events as temporary distractions from meaningful work and genuine achievement. Once home, I retreated to my room to prepare for the interview, researching Dr. Helena Westfield's background and contributions to neural regeneration research. The more I learned, the more impressed I became. Her pioneering work in biomaterials had led to breakthrough treatments for previously irreparable nerve damage. The scholarship bearing her name represented not merely financial support, but potential mentorship from a genuine innovator in my field of interest. As evening approached, my phone chimed with a text from Dr. Sorensen. Summer research position application approved. Position available beginning June 15th, if scholarship secured. Details to follow. The succession of positive developments, proposal acceptance, interview opportunity, research position approval, created momentum that contrasted sharply with the wedding-centered activity throughout the house. While flower deliveries arrived, and seating charts were revised for the 5th time, I was quietly assembling the components of my future, piece by methodical piece. A gentle knock at my door revealed my father, his expression unusually serious. "Your mother mentioned you've been in contact with your grandfather," he said without preamble. "I think we need to have a family discussion about realistic expectations and outside influences." "I'm preparing for an important scholarship interview tomorrow," I replied calmly. "Could this discussion wait until afterward?" He studied me for a moment, seemingly trying to reconcile my composed confidence with the compliant daughter he'd always known. "Tuesday evening, then. After your scholarship deadline. Your mother and I want to ensure you're making decisions based on practical realities, not promises that might not materialize." I nodded agreement, recognizing the discussion would eventually be necessary, but preferring to approach it from a position of secured rather than potential opportunity. After he left, I returned to my interview preparation with renewed determination. Tomorrow's conversation with Dr. Westfield represented far more than a scholarship opportunity. It was a chance to connect with a genuine innovator in my field, to demonstrate my capability beyond standardized metrics, to secure not just funding but meaningful mentorship. While wedding music selections played downstairs and relatives exclaimed over honeymoon destination brochures, I reviewed neural regeneration literature and practiced articulating my research interests with precision and confidence. The parallel tracks continued, surface compliance with family expectations while steadily advancing toward independent achievement. As I finally prepared for sleep, a text from Zoe provided perfect perspective. "Remember when we were 10 and you built that working model of a heart valve for science fair? While other kids made baking soda volcanoes, you've always been on a different track. This wedding drama is just making it obvious to everyone else what some of us have always known. You're extraordinary, Liv. Crush that interview tomorrow." Her message crystallized something I'd been gradually recognizing throughout this challenging period. The redirection of my college fund hadn't created my difficult situation. It had merely revealed existing family dynamics that had shaped my entire life. The revelation was painful but ultimately liberating, clarifying exactly why independent pursuit of my goals wasn't just necessary but appropriate. Tomorrow would bring multiple challenges, each requiring different skills and focus. But tonight, I felt genuinely prepared, not just academically, but emotionally, to navigate these parallel tracks with integrity and purpose. The scholarship interview represented not just financial opportunity, but confirmation that my academic path mattered, regardless of my family's differing priorities. With that understanding firmly established, I set my alarm for 5 a.m. and closed my eyes, ready for whatever challenges the pivotal day ahead might bring. Monday morning arrived with the first hints of dawn barely visible through my bedroom window. My 5 a.m. alarm proved unnecessary, as I'd awakened naturally at 4:47, my mind already cycling through the day's multiple challenges. AP Physics exam at 8 a.m., Stanford Financial Aid meeting at noon, Westfield Scholarship interview at 5 p.m., and family dinner with the Thatchers at 7 p.m. I moved through my morning preparation with methodical efficiency, reviewing key physics formulas while brushing my teeth, mentally organizing interview talking points while selecting professional attire that could transition from school to virtual meetings. The quiet house allowed uninterrupted focus as I prepared both academically and psychologically for the pivotal day ahead. My father appeared in the kitchen just as I was finishing breakfast, surprise evident in his expression at finding me already dressed and reviewing notes at 6:30 a.m. "You're up early," he observed, reaching for the coffee pot. "Nervous about your exam?" "Just prepared," I replied. "The physics test is only the first milestone today." He poured his coffee, studying me with that same evaluative gaze I'd noticed increasingly over the weekend. "Your mother and I were talking last night. We're concerned about your grandfather's influence over your college decisions. Robert has always had complicated feelings about this family that might color his advice. The familiar refrain about my grandfather's supposedly problematic perspective had begun to sound increasingly hollow. The complicated feelings they referenced seemed to center primarily around his emphasis on educational achievement and intellectual integrity, values that had shaped my own aspirations from an early age. Grandpa has always supported my academic goals, I said simply. That consistency is helpful right now. My father sighed, setting down his coffee mug. Olivia, we understand you're disappointed about Stanford's financial situation, but allowing your grandfather to create unrealistic expectations won't help in the long run. Community college followed by transfer to a state university is a perfectly respectable path. The characterization of Stanford as an unrealistic expectation, rather than an earned achievement, revealed volumes about our fundamentally different value systems. Rather than engaging in a futile debate, I gathered my exam materials and stood to leave. I need to get to school early to center myself before the test, I explained. We can discuss college plans tomorrow evening as agreed. He nodded reluctantly. Don't forget we have dinner with the Thatchers tonight at 7. Your mother has laid out appropriate attire on your bed. I'll be ready, I promised, slipping my backpack over my shoulder and heading for the door. The April morning air felt refreshing as I cycled to school, the physical activity helping clear my mind for the academic challenges ahead. I arrived with 30 minutes to spare, using the time to review electromagnetic formulas in the quiet library before heading to the exam room. The AP physics test itself proved surprisingly straightforward. The concepts that had initially seemed impenetrable back in September now flowed logically through my calculations, each problem connecting to fundamental principles I'd internalized through months of dedicated study. As I worked through the free response questions, I experienced that unique clarity that comes from complete preparation, meeting-focused execution. When the exam period ended, I felt a quiet confidence about my performance, not from arrogance, but from the simple recognition of thorough preparation, yielding appropriate results. Several classmates gathered in the hallway afterward, comparing answers and lamenting particularly challenging problems, but I moved purposefully toward Mrs. Chamberlain's classroom for my Stanford financial meeting. How was the exam? She asked as I set up my laptop at her desk. Manageable, I replied. The magnetic flux problems were actually interesting. She smiled knowingly. Only you would find AP Physics interesting during wedding week. How are the scholarship and financial aid efforts progressing? That's what this meeting will determine, I explained, logging into the video conference platform. The Stanford Financial Aid Office is reviewing how potential scholarship funds would integrate with other aid options. I'm keeping my fingers crossed for you, she said, heading toward the door. Text me after your Westfield interview. I'm invested in this outcome. At precisely noon, my screen displayed Dr. Elena Morales from Stanford's Financial Aid Office, along with a new participant, a serious-looking woman introduced as Ms. Abigail Chen from the Engineering Department's Scholarship Committee. Thank you for making time during what I understand is a busy family week, Dr. Morales began, referencing the wedding information I'd mentioned in previous correspondence. We have potentially positive developments to discuss regarding your financial situation. For the next 30 minutes, they outlined a comprehensive approach to my funding needs. The potential Westfield scholarship would cover approximately 60% of annual costs, with additional departmental grants potentially addressing another 20%. The remaining expenses could be managed through a combination of work-study programs and modest loans that wouldn't require parental co-signing. Based on Dr. Sorensen's communication with our department, Ms. Chen explained, the Westfield interview represents the final stage in their selection process. He's indicated your proposal received the highest preliminary evaluation, which significantly increases your chances of selection. If the Westfield comes through, Dr. Morales added, we would still need documentation regarding your trust fund to finalize the complete financial package. Your grandfather mentioned this during our preliminary conversation. My meeting with the attorney on Saturday clarified all procedural requirements, I confirmed. I can provide the necessary documentation immediately following the scholarship decision. Dr. Morales smiled with genuine warmth. Olivia, I've been working in financial aid for 15 years. Students face devastating financial setbacks for many reasons: family emergencies, economic downturns, unexpected medical expenses. But having designated educational funds redirected to a sibling's wedding is unusually challenging. Her diplomatic phrasing of what was essentially parental betrayal reflected professional restraint, but her sympathetic expression conveyed clear understanding of the emotional dimensions of my situation. I appreciate Stanford's willingness to work with my complicated circumstances, I said carefully. Exceptional students warrant exceptional consideration, Ms. Chen stated matter-of-factly. Your academic profile and research potential justify our department's interest in ensuring your enrollment, regardless of unusual financial complications. After concluding the meeting with procedural next steps based on the scholarship outcome, I sat quietly in Mrs. Chamberlain's empty classroom, processing the significant progress toward making Stanford financially feasible. The remaining gaps seemed manageable, particularly with my grandfather's trust providing essential foundation. I texted him a brief update. Stanford meeting successful. Financial package viable if scholarship secured. Interview at 5 p.m. still on schedule. His response came quickly. Car will collect you at 4:15 p.m. for hotel. Suite prepared for professional interview environment. Bringing appropriate attire? I confirmed that my backpack contained a pressed blouse and tailored jacket to supplement my already neat appearance, making it suitable for the formal interview context. The afternoon passed in productive preparation, reviewing Dr. Westfield's research publications during study hall, preparing concise talking points about my proposal during lunch, and mentally rehearsing responses to likely questions during my final class period. At precisely 4:15, I found a sleek black car waiting at the school's front entrance, the driver holding a discreet sign with Caldwell printed in professional typography. The thoughtfulness of my grandfather's arrangements, providing transportation, appropriate setting, and privacy for this critical interview, reinforced what genuine support looked like in practice rather than merely in theory. The hotel suite proved ideal for my needs: a spacious living area with professional lighting, minimal background distractions, and excellent internet connectivity. My grandfather had arranged a small desk with perfectly positioned laptop stand to ensure optimal camera angle and professional appearance. I'll be in the adjacent room if you need anything, he explained after showing me the setup. But I suspect you're thoroughly prepared. I am, I confirmed, feeling genuine confidence rather than bravado. Dr. Westfield's recent publication on hydrogel-based growth factor delivery aligns perfectly with aspects of my proposal. I've prepared specific questions about her methodology. He nodded approvingly. Demonstrating knowledge of her work will make a positive impression. Remember to articulate not just what your research would investigate, but why it matters in the broader context. At precisely 5 o'clock, I initiated the video call, taking a deep, centering breath as the connection processed. When the screen illuminated, I found myself facing a distinguished woman in her 60s, her silver hair styled in a practical bob, and her expression attentive behind modern glasses. Ms. Caldwell, she greeted me with professional warmth. I'm Helena Westfield. Thank you for accommodating this somewhat rushed interview process. Thank you for considering my application, Dr. Westfield, I replied with composed enthusiasm. Your work on biomaterial scaffolds for neural regeneration has been foundational to my understanding of the field. Her expression registered pleasant surprise at this specific knowledge of her research. Leonard, Dr. Sorensen, indicated your proposal demonstrated unusual sophistication for an undergraduate applicant, let alone a prospective freshman. I was particularly interested in your approach to combined structural support and biochemical delivery systems. For the next 45 minutes, Our conversation flowed through increasingly technical territory: the challenges of consistent degradation rates, methods for preventing inflammatory responses, potential applications for stroke recovery versus traumatic injury. Dr. Westfield posed thoughtful questions that tested not just my knowledge, but my analytical thinking and creative problem-solving approaches. Your proposal suggests using layered polymer structures with differential degradation timing, she noted at one point. What challenges do you anticipate in maintaining structural integrity during the transitional phases? The question addressed precisely the most technically challenging aspect of my proposed approach, one I'd deliberately acknowledged as requiring further development. Rather than attempting to gloss over this complexity, I engaged directly with the limitation. That's the most significant technical hurdle, I acknowledged. Current approaches sacrifice either structural stability or controlled release timing. I've been exploring potential hybrid systems that could maintain critical structural elements while allowing precise biochemical delivery through sacrificial components. Dr. Westfield nodded with what appeared to be approval. Recognizing the limitations of existing approaches is as important as proposing innovations. Science advances through persistent engagement with technically challenging problems, not by ignoring them. As our discussion concluded, she shifted to more personal territory. Dr. Sorensen mentioned you're navigating some unusual financial challenges regarding your Stanford enrollment. Without delving into private matters, I want to assure you that our selection process focuses exclusively on scientific merit and research potential. I appreciate that clarification, I responded sincerely. Regardless of financial complexities, my commitment to biomedical engineering research remains my primary focus. She nodded thoughtfully. The Westfield Scholarship was established precisely to ensure that financial circumstances don't prevent promising scientific talent from developing. My own education was nearly derailed by family financial limitations, an experience that informed the scholarship's creation. This personal revelation provided unexpected context for her evident interest in my situation. Before I could formulate an appropriate response, she continued with professional directness. Based on our conversation today and your exceptional proposal, I'm pleased to inform you that the selection committee has authorized me to offer you the Westfield Engineering Scholarship, effective for your freshman year with renewal options based on academic performance. The simple statement, delivered without fanfare, represented the critical piece that would make Stanford financially viable. For a moment, I struggled to maintain professional composure as the significance registered fully. Thank you, Dr. Westfield, I managed finally. This opportunity means everything. Talent deserves cultivation, she replied simply. You'll receive formal documentation tomorrow, along with specific procedural requirements for Stanford's financial aid integration. Dr. Sorensen has also indicated interest in involving you in summer research that would provide valuable preparation for your fall coursework. After concluding the call with appropriate expressions of gratitude and commitment, I sat quietly at the desk, processing the monumental significance of what had just occurred. The Westfield Scholarship, the critical component that transformed Stanford from impossible dream to imminent reality, was now secured. My grandfather appeared in the doorway, his expression questioning rather than presumptuous. Good news, judging by your expression. The scholarship is confirmed, I replied, my voice steadier than I expected given the emotional impact. Dr. Westfield made the offer directly. Formal documentation arrives tomorrow. His restrained smile conveyed genuine pleasure without excessive celebration. Well-deserved, Olivia. This recognition reflects your genuine scientific potential, not merely academic achievement. The distinction he drew between grades and genuine intellectual contribution reflected his consistent emphasis on substance over credentials, on meaningful work over external validation. That perspective had shaped my own approach to education, focusing on understanding rather than mere achievement. "We should leave for the restaurant soon," I noted, checking the time. "The family dinner with the Thatchers starts at 7. As we rode to the restaurant in comfortable silence, I contemplated the extraordinary contrast between my day's accomplishments and the evening's social obligations. I had secured a prestigious scholarship, confirmed Stanford's financial viability, and engaged with a leading researcher in my field of interest, all while my family remained focused exclusively on wedding minutiae and social impressions. The fundamental disconnect between our priorities had never been more evident, yet paradoxically, I felt less frustrated by this reality than I had days earlier. The scholarship confirmation, coming after my grandfather's trust revelation, had created a sense of genuine independence, my path forward no longer depending on my parents' approval, understanding, or financial support. When we arrived at the restaurant, I found my family already seated with the Thatchers at an elaborate table decorated with floral arrangements that echoed the wedding theme. My mother's expression registered momentary surprise at my arrival with my grandfather. "Robert," she greeted him with careful politeness, "we weren't expecting you this evening. I had business downtown and offered Olivia transportation," he explained smoothly. "Caroline, Richard, a pleasure to see you again after so many years." Mrs. Thatcher welcomed him warmly, apparently genuinely pleased by his presence. "Robert Caldwell, it's been 20 years? Not since that engineering conference in Boston where Richard's firm was presenting." As they settled into reminiscence about shared professional connections, my mother leaned toward me with barely contained tension. "You might have mentioned, your grandfather was joining us." "It was a last-minute arrangement," I explained quietly. "He had business nearby." Melissa, seated across the table, shot me a perplexed look that clearly questioned this departure from the carefully orchestrated social choreography she had planned. I offered a neutral smile in return, neither apologetic nor confrontational, about the unexpected development. Throughout the elaborate dinner, I participated appropriately in wedding-related conversations, while maintaining an internal sense of quiet triumph about the day's actual achievements. The scholarship confirmation had transformed my future prospects more significantly than any social connection or family dinner ever could, a reality apparent to me, if not to those discussing flower arrangements and photography timelines around me. As the evening progressed, I found myself observing the interactions with newfound clarity. My parents' careful deference to the Thatchers, Melissa's practiced charm, Jackson's rehearsed anecdotes, all represented a performance of social connection that seemed increasingly superficial compared to the genuine intellectual engagement I'd experienced with Dr. Westfield hours earlier. This recognition didn't make me feel superior, merely different, oriented toward values and priorities that diverged fundamentally from those being celebrated around me. That divergence had always existed. The recent events had merely made it impossible to ignore. As dessert was served, Mrs. Thatcher unexpectedly directed conversation toward me. "Olivia, I was telling Richard about your interest in biomedical engineering. It's such an innovative field. How did your scholarship interview go today?" The direct question created immediate tension at the table. My mother's expression froze in a smile that didn't reach her eyes, while my father straightened almost imperceptibly. Melissa's gaze darted between us, sensing the underlying discomfort. Rather than avoiding the subject or minimizing its significance, I chose simple honesty. "It went well, thank you for asking. I've been offered the Westfield Engineering Scholarship for Stanford's bioengineering program." The simple statement landed like a stone in still water, creating ripples of reaction around the table. Mrs. Thatcher's expression reflected genuine pleasure, while my parents exchanged a quick glance laden with unspoken communication. My grandfather maintained neutral composure, though I detected subtle satisfaction in his posture. "The Westfield?" Mrs. Thatcher responded with evident recognition. "That's extraordinarily prestigious. Helena Westfield is a pioneer in regenerative medicine. Congratulations, Olivia. As others at the table added their congratulations, some genuine, some merely polite, I maintained composed gratitude while observing the complex emotional currents flowing beneath the social niceties. My parents' expressions reflected a complicated mixture of pride, confusion, and what appeared to be growing suspicion about how this development had occurred without their involvement. The remainder of the evening passed in superficial pleasantries, the brief acknowledgement of my scholarship quickly subsumed by renewed wedding discussions. Yet something had fundamentally shifted in the family dynamic. My achievement, publicly recognized by the socially significant Thatchers, could no longer be dismissed as mere academic distraction from real family priorities. As we prepared to leave, Mrs. Thatcher approached me privately. "Stanford's bioengineering program is world-class," she said with genuine interest. "My nephew could provide some valuable connections when you arrive on campus. I'd be happy to put you in touch." "I would appreciate that very much," I replied. Sincerely. "Excellence deserves recognition and support," she added, her gaze momentarily shifting toward my sister and parents before returning to me. "Not everyone understands the value of intellectual achievement, but those who matter do." The simple statement, offered with quiet understanding, suggested she comprehended more about my family's dynamics than her polite social demeanor had indicated. Her recognition of my achievement and subtle acknowledgement of my parents' different priorities provided unexpected validation from an unexpected source. As we drove home, my mother finally addressed the elephant in the room. "When were you planning to tell us about this scholarship? And how exactly is Stanford suddenly financially feasible?" "I plan to discuss everything tomorrow evening. As Dad and I agreed yesterday," I replied calmly. "Today was about securing the opportunity. Tomorrow can be about explaining the details." "Your grandfather is clearly involved in these arrangements," she pressed, her tone sharpening. "What exactly has he promised you, Olivia?" My grandfather, driving with characteristic precision, maintained dignified silence, allowing me to navigate this conversation independently. "He's provided support and guidance," I acknowledged. "The specific financial arrangements can be discussed tomorrow when we have appropriate time and privacy." My father's expression reflected growing concern. "Olivia, any financial commitments involving your education should have been discussed with us first. We're still your parents and legal guardians." "I understand your perspective," I replied, carefully, "and I'm prepared to explain everything tomorrow. For tonight, I'd appreciate the opportunity to simply appreciate an achievement that represents years of academic work." The reasonable request temporarily paused their interrogation, though the tension remained palpable as we completed the drive in strained silence. Tomorrow's conversation would inevitably bring confrontation about my grandfather's trust and my independent arrangements, but tonight, I allowed myself to quietly celebrate the day's multiple successes. As I prepared for bed that evening, I reflected on the extraordinary contrast between the day's beginning and its conclusion. In just 14 hours, I had completed an AP exam, secured critical financial arrangements with Stanford, earned a prestigious scholarship, and publicly established my academic path forward, all while fulfilling expected family obligations regarding the wedding. The parallel tracks that had defined recent days were beginning to diverge towards separate destinations. Tomorrow would bring necessary explanations and potential conflict, but the essential victory was already secured. Stanford was no longer a denied dream, but an approaching reality, made possible not through parental support, but through a combination of merit, mentorship, and my own persistent determination. With that knowledge firmly established, I set my alarm for tomorrow's AP chemistry exam and closed my eyes, ready for whatever the next phase might bring. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.